It's halftime, and no, we're not talking football. We're just about 6 weeks away from the second-year anniversary of President Bola Tinubu's administration. From bold reforms to bolder rhetoric, the journey so far has been anything but predictable. We've seen sweeping moves on FX, monetary tightening, headline-making budgets, and a long list of economic pledges. But what's the real scorecard telling us? Are we setting up for a strong second half or heading into extra time on growth, jobs, and investment? Joining me to break it all down is a man who never sits on the sidelines when it comes to Nigeria's economy, Tilewa Adebajo, CEO of CFG Advisory, with his sharp eye for numbers and policy nuance. He'll help us separate the headline heat from the economic meat. Great to see you.
Good morning.
Good morning. Great to see you. And you look fabulous.
Thank you.
Okay, so I guess my first question is, what in your mind has been the biggest success so far economically, and what has been the biggest misstep?
Well, I think the biggest success so far has been stabilization. I think finally we have stability within the economic policy, and stability in terms of policy formulation, both monetary policy, fiscal policy, but we're still way behind when it comes to trade and investment policy. And investment policy, as you can see with what is happening with the tariffs, as I've said a lot of times, our HS codes still needs to be reviewed, our industrial policy needs to be set. But considering where we were coming from 2-3 years ago, I think that is where we've made progress. My biggest concern, however, has to do with the way the reforms have been handled.
Okay.
While we all agree that there was need for us to remove the subsidy, the ways and means by which the subsidy was removed, at least
was it a timing or sequencing issue? What was your issue?
Everything it's been done. It's like pulling a tooth without anesthesia.
Very painful.
Yes.
Very, very painful.
Yes. Yeah. So that's my only issue, and my biggest issue also has to do with the foreign exchange, which we can talk about more later. I think the way the foreign exchange was devalued and has devalued, it's not reflective of the where the Naira should be now, and I believe that the Naira should be sub 1,000.
Okay.
We're looking more at price discovery, and I think we can talk about that more because if you take a look at the way the dollar and the pound has moved against each other, or the dollar and the yen, or the dollar and euro over the last 25 years, you cannot see the sort of 300% swings that we've seen in the last 2 years.
Sure.
So that has been the biggest volatility. However, having said that, I think one of the key challenges we now face is that the last 3 years, the budget deficit cumulatively has hit about 40 trillion.
Absolutely.
And all the savings that we've made from the subsidy removal is now unfortunately going towards debt service. So there's need for a lot of restructuring of the federal government's balance sheet. And it's time to liquidate assets from that side.
And of course, I was going to come to you on that, because we have, at least according to the latest publications, I look at about 150 trillion in public debt.
Yes.
And also then limited asset monetization, which I know you're a huge advocate on. So do we now need to look at a sort of a whole of government balance sheet approach where we're actively monetizing these assets? And then sort of tied to that is we literally have just another 2 years to do all of these, because once the political cycle kicks in, we have no clue. Everything is out of our control at that point. So what would be your strategy on this debt reduction push?
Well, like you said, with every corporate, if you look at corporate balance sheets, I think people are used to talking about restructuring when it comes to corporate balance sheets. And there's really no difference when it comes to the public sector balance sheets. Their assets and their liabilities on the side. If you take a look at the current assets of Nigeria now and their current liabilities, the current liabilities exceed the current assets. So that means that technically the federal government of Nigeria is insolvent. But Nigeria is rich on the asset side.
Absolutely.
But those assets are illiquid. So it's important that we need to try to find out how to optimize those assets and to be able to optimize. We've more or less reached our debt ceilings, as you've said, within the capital structure of Nigeria. So it's time now for us to begin to optimize equity within the capital structure of the federal government of Nigeria's balance sheet. And I think that's really what we need to do.
And if you were going to optimize equity, which assets would you recommend as a first target?
I think we've talked extensively about the NNPC JV assets.
Well, there's the JV assets.
Yes.
I mean, there's talk now of NNPC doing an IPO, which may then involve the hiving off of specific assets under that sort of structure, although that's a slightly...
Well, I think what happens is that I think with the new management in NNPC, I think that has put in a lot of confidence into the sector because they're all very proven. All of them have proven track records, and they're professionals that should get the job done. And I think with the sort of private sector approach the NNPC is taking place in terms of its management, I think the board of the NNPC now has significant amounts of responsibility, being a limited liability company. And of course, the clear owners of NNPC are MOFI and MOPI. That's the Ministry of Finance Incorporated and the Ministry of Petroleum Incorporated. Yeah. So as a limited liability entity, there's a lot of responsibility now with the board of the NNPC, working, of course, with the president directly, who is the Minister of Petroleum. Yeah. So a lot of expectations in that area, and I think that's the easy way, because I think the assets that we've identified that I believe that on the long run can yield about 35 billion. And I think if we do the first round now, we should be able to raise about $15 billion. So I think that's really where we need to be, you know, in terms of
and what other assets would you then put in that pipeline?
Well, there are many other assets that you can see that the government owns in terms of their buildings, for instance. There are a lot of public buildings across the country that maybe the government does not need, that can give to real estate developers to do commercial real estate with. There are lots of concessions that could be done with power stations across the country. Privatization hasn't worked that well. So I think concessioning and looking at other options, I think, are more easy. So there's still a lot of state-owned corporations that can be hived off, and state-owned assets that are underutilized that we need to look at. So I think there's challenges. I think just behind us here in Lagos, we have the TBS, the Tafawa Balewa Square, and you have the Independence Building, which is like one of the tallest buildings in Lagos. It's been empty for the past part of like 30 years. So it's still a structurally sound building, but you know, there's so many underutilized assets all over the country that can be put into the pool.
Indeed. Okay, interesting perspectives. So in its recent report, when Nigeria's ratings were upgraded, Fitch talked about post-reform liquidity, but warned of FX liquidity, but warned of continued risks around short-term depreciation. And if I look at the policy thrust over the last 2 years, I see that there's been a bigger focus on price discovery rather than the actual FX strategy.
Yes.
So how do we make, and you talked about stability as being one of the greatest success stories so far, but we need to do more than that now. We need to now start to look at an active FX strategy. And one of the analysts I had on the show 2 weeks ago talked about the fact that he felt Nigeria's economy had made a structural shift, which had sort of gone underreported, around how the government had managed to diversify FX revenue sources. I wasn't convinced, but I want to hear your thoughts around how we make that shift to just focusing on price discovery. I'm not even sure we've really achieved that, and then look at a more sound long-term strategy around FX liquidity.
Well, first of all, one of the things you must understand is that there's a lot of economic intelligence that goes behind a lot of all these things. The national foreign exchange management is a national security issue, and it's important that within the
How is it a national security issue?
I'll tell you that it's important that the national security advisor must have an economic intelligence unit that is independently monitoring the sources and uses of foreign exchange.
Okay.
The U.S. government issues the dollar, and the dollar is available everywhere, including Nigeria. How do you know that the dollars we have in Nigeria are original? So the CIA is actively monitoring US dollars over the world in terms of activity, in terms of counterfeiting, and they're infiltrating criminal gangs that try to forge the US dollar. It's an active management, because if they didn't do that, how do you think that the US is managing the credibility of the dollar and the amount of dollars in terms of physical cash around the world. There's a lot of intelligence that goes into this. In South Africa, currency is treated like narcotics. The average South African doesn't want to touch foreign currency because you think that you are dealing in, they look at it like you're dealing in drugs. Because, as far as they're concerned, foreign currency is not, they don't need it, they need their local rand. But in Nigeria, we have a laxity with foreign exchange here that some people will tell me that the parallel markets is this. Why should there be a parallel market? We have one market that has price discovery, active bid and offer system. Why should we be looking at that? So we need to look at the other side of management, of economic management and financial management. So don't get it wrong. The US government doesn't sleep. There are active networks within the Treasury that does intelligence to monitor all these things. And that is really what we need to do right now in terms of how we look at our foreign exchange. But like I said, my own belief is that why over the last 2 years has the dollar gone from 500 to 1,700 now to maybe 1,600? Tell me what factors are driving it. And show me one currency around the world that has those sort of swings.
Trajectory, yes.
So there's a significant amount of speculation and manipulation within that system.
Yeah.
So as far as I see it, I think that the Naira should be trading sub 1,000, where I don't know, but definitely sub 1,000. And, we need to take a look at price discovery. So with this system in place now, we're beginning to see that $25 billion a year comes in from the diaspora. Every year, if not more. And not to talk about informal sources, you're looking at $30 billion alone from that source. We just need to, I believe that with this, we're on the right track, but we need to put in the intelligence monitoring into this, because if I ask anybody a question, nobody has been able to tell me what is the demand for dollars in Nigeria every year.
Yeah, so we actually need to find a way to gather that data, measure it, and assess how it's impacting the policy thrust of the government. Interesting you say that, because recently there was news out of the US that in its bid to continue to police and marshal the dollar around the world, Trump was now targeting people who were holding dollars, even if those dollars were legitimately acquired.
I don't believe that report. I have not validated that report.
Really?
So I think we need to be very careful. I think, I'm not sure that might be fake news. It might be fake news because I've not seen any credible report from the US Treasury on that, because the U.S. government already has mechanisms by which it monitors its dollars,
absolutely.
Which I talked
so
about.
Why do you need to go after
It's not an overt
people?
It's not an overt process.
And they wouldn't even tell you what they were planning to do, because that would undermine the whole thrust.
So that's
very good point. So I want to talk about reform fatigue and legitimacy.
Yes.
When we look at the policy thrust of the government and the sort of short-term pain that many of us have felt, we've kind of understood, some of us have understood why this needed to be done. But I think the management of that process maybe weakened the government's public legitimacy around the actual policies. So in terms of overall governance and communication around policies and what you're trying to do, somehow we tend to leave the public education to the impact and effect. When Nigerians start to feel the pinch, then they start to understand, this is what they were trying to do. Whereas a more active approach to say, we are going to be doing this, this is the impact it will have on Nigerians, and this is how long it will take for that impact to wear off.
And this is what we're going to do to cushion.
To cushion the impact. So that very definitive communication, targeted, is something that I personally think we have missed. So what do we need to do going forward? And what types of policies do you then see on the horizon for these remaining 2 years, given everything we've done? And how should the government be communicating that?
Well, you've hit the nail on the head. I think people take for granted the importance of communication strategy and even a policy. The policy might be wrong, but you need to sell it.
Yeah.
And if people accept what you're doing, and if people can bear the pain and understand that there's light at the end of the tunnel, or instead of people talking about being rice at the end of the tunnel. But anyway, having said that, I think what is important for me now is more strategy. Okay, where are we going? For instance, now, we import $25 billion worth of goods from China every year. So the question now is, why are we doing this? So why is there the pressure on the dollar when most of our trade is coming from China? Okay, so even if you take a look at it, the inflows from the diaspora can offset our dollar requirements from our biggest trading partner. So there was never an issue of demand for dollars not being met. We talked about the issue of the backlog with the Central Bank of Nigeria. But when you came in with an orthodox management system, that backlog was verified and eventually cleared out because there was a proper system or mechanism in place to deal with that. So what exactly is driving this dollar increase? So your trade policy, which Trump is bringing to the forefront now, is that we're not being impacted because we're not big exporters to America anyway. But the question now is, what are we doing with our trade policy? So China should start to manufacture a significant amount of that 25 billion in trade in Nigeria to be able to boost our industrial development. That is what I'm looking at now. That is what is important. Next question, where are the next set of investments taking place? We've seen what the NNPC is trying to do with new investments. They've made a statement as to
60 billion by 2030, 30
yes,
billion
but
in the
do you
next
know that
3
there
or
was
4
a point in time where we were attracting 25 to 30 billion dollars worth of investments a year into our oil industry? Now that has dropped to under $3 billion. So we need to restore that. So let's leave the oil and gas industry alone. Where are the oligarchs in Nigeria, the big boys and girls? Where are they putting their next $10 billion or $5 billion? Where are the next big projects in Nigeria?
Where's the next Dangote refinery?
Exactly. We haven't seen a lot of all these things. And there must be a deliberate policy to do that. That is what I want to see now. Now I want to see more of deliberate strategy. We've stopped importing cement. We now manufacture and export cement. Great. I told you the last time, we have all these refineries, sugar refineries at the ports. When are Nigerian farmers going to start growing the sugar required to supply those refineries? So right now, what I would like to see is deliberate industrial policies and trade policies that will yield results, that will create jobs, for people, that will empower Nigeria and grow the economy. Because if you take a look at the growth at 3%, it's not optimal for a population of 200 million.
But I think with the deliberate strategy around industrial policy, if I use the Dangote refinery saga as a microcosm, one of the things I often see is a complete mismatch between opportunity and risk, in the sense that, you know, $20 billion worth of investment constructed over many years. There's a clear market opportunity because of our size and our position in the region, but the hurdles as an investor you have to cross, and the pain you feel from staking that sort of your hard-earned income on such a massive infrastructure project then gets a lot of people asking, is it worth it? So I think part of what the government needs to do is to remove the barriers and the obstacles that would prevent, you know, 100 more $20 billion investments to the size of a Dangote refinery to come into the economy. And I think that is...
You took the words out of my mouth.
That is part of the issue.
That exactly is
but
what
I wanted to just quickly ask you around the issue around governance, transparency and credibility and institutional stability and continuity. What can we do to get that right? Because that was one of the things the Fitch report also cites when it was upgrading Nigeria's credit ratings, very briefly.
You see, we shouldn't depend on these foreign agencies to... World Bank said this, IMF said this. No. We shouldn't depend on endorsement of Fitch or World Bank. If you take a look at our rating, it's an upgrade. But in terms of the overall rating, we're still at junk bond status.
We're not at investment grade status
yet. But it's a significant, it's a significant movement, and you know, and it has reduced the cost of our foreign borrowing.
Right.
Okay.
Yes.
It has reduced the cost of our foreign borrowing. But we should not be dependent on these agencies. The system itself needs to be able to, or the government itself needs to be able to articulate what they're doing, as you've said in the beginning, and tell people what they want to do and how we're going to get there.
Absolutely.
And that's the bottom line.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tilewa Adebajo. Always great talking to you today. Well, that's all we have time for on Business Week. I'm Rolake Akinkubefeleni. Of course, let's continue the conversation on X as always. Do you have a lovely rest of the weekend? See you soon.